Good evening, folks. My name is Arun Venugopal, and I'm a reporter with WNYC and host of its Micropolis series, which focuses on issues of gender, race, identity. And I'm very happy to be the moderator of this event tonight. I'm grateful to Women for Afghan Women for asking me to be here and part of this, because I genuinely feel this is a really important thing that we have going on here. This is an important event. And I think it's set against a very important moment in our history. We are marking the deaths of 49 people last week, but at the same time, we're trying to see how that tragedy can be transformed. And I think what's really important, events like this mark the fact that marginalized communities are increasingly trying to shape the conversations, not only around events like that, but around larger inequities in society. And tonight we have the benefit of trying to get various communities in the room together, and that's quite rare. It was just yesterday I was speaking to Sunita Vishwanath, who is the co-founder of Women for Afghan Women, and she was saying, in regards to what happened in Orlando last week, you know, that could have been any one of our clients' sons, because he grew up in Flushing, Queens. He is a son of New York. And I think that reflects an acknowledgement that instead of saying he doesn't represent us, there's something that needs to be addressed that he reflects. And tonight we're going to try to address all these issues: homophobia, violence against women, Islamophobia, and try to understand what is it that connects all these things. How do we make sure we don't see them in silos? That's why we have all these people on stage tonight, and while we also hope that you all will participate in this discussion. This is a town hall discussion. So the idea here is to have a very frank conversation to address, to confront the frictions that are being observed in some of these communities. And of course, there's an inherent tension. We want to do that and be frank and be real, as the young folks say these days, but also to be respectful. So that means no homophobic statements, no Islamophobic statements, no transphobia. And I think that can be accomplished. So on that note, let's get going. We'd like to start with a prayer from Imam Sherzad of the masjid in Flushing, Queens, the Dar al-Taqwa Mosque.
Good evening, everybody. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد خلقنا الإنسان ونعلم ما توسوس به نفسه ونحن أقرب إليه من حبل الوريد إذ يتلقى المتلقيان عن اليمين وعن الشمال قعيد ما يلفظ من قول إلا لديه رقيب عتيد وجاءت سكرة الموت بالحق ذلك ما كنت منه تحيد صدق الله مولانا العظيم.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask all of us to observe a moment of silence. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Reverend Valerie Hawley and Michael Crumpler of Judson Memorial Church to welcome you to this wonderful space that they've been kind to offer to us.
Thank you. As Aaron said, my name is Reverend Valerie Holly. I am Senior Community Minister here at Judson Memorial Church. And on behalf of Reverend Dr. Donna Scopper, who's the Senior Minister, and Reverend Micah Busey, who's the Associate Minister, we welcome you to our church. We want those to know who may not know that Judson has a very rich and diverse history in addressing social justice issues and needs, not only of those that are considered marginalized, but the underserved. So I want to thank you again for using this space and allowing us to host this very, very important event.
Amen. I am Michael Crumpler, moderator of the board of Judson Memorial Church, and on behalf of the congregation, I too would like to welcome you to this sacred space. And as we meet together to discuss these sacred issues, just know that we are with you in spirit and are bound together with you in the discussion as we grieve and mourn and become active to change things. Amen.
All right, thank you, folks. So this is how it's going to work. We have a number of speakers here. They're each going to make fairly brief statements. And then what we're going to do is involve all of you in the audience with them in a town hall discussion, as we call it. And we offer cards, I think. Anybody wants to write down their questions, feel free to do that. We have somebody right over here who's got cards. You can do that. Or we're also going to have microphones that we're going to pass around if you just want to ask it in person. So we're going to start tonight with Manisha Naderi. She is the Executive Director of Women for Afghan Women.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think Omar Mateen grew up a scared boy and a repressed teenager. I think I know this because that's what you see when you work for a women's rights organization. You see scared boys become repressed teenagers that turn into wife beaters, intolerant fathers, angry men, and sometimes even murderously angry men. The hate crimes committed by Omar Mateen has no justification. We condemn his actions in the strongest possible terms. Our hearts are shattered by grief from the terrible loss of innocent lives at the hands of one disturbed man. When the news came in, our hearts sank. Another mass shooting, this time in Orlando, this time in a gay bar. But this time, it was a man of Afghan descent, born right here in New York, a half hour away from where we're sitting today. Then came the fear of backlash, of bigotry, and in that moment, we knew we had to do something. Omar Mateen grew up in an environment that rejects others, an environment that translates authority into exerting power instead of love, and rejection instead of tolerance. We as women long ago made the connection between emasculation and domestic abuse, and between a twisted view of religion and intolerance, and between patriarchy and violence. This is the heart and soul of the work we do with the women, men, girls, and boys we serve. And many Afghan men, like Imam Sherzad, also made these connections and have become staunch allies in our daily battles and stand by our violated women, shelter our girls, and talk to our men. I think Omar Mateen was rejected by everything in his life. He even rejected himself. The only thing that didn't reject Omar Mateen was ISIS, and only in his death will it embrace him. And the more we find out about Mateen, the more I suspect ISIS will also reject him, because he was probably a homosexual, a repressed homosexual that fell short of twisted standards of what it means to be a man. It took us 15 years to break the taboo of domestic violence. Omar Mateen just murderously put the taboo of homosexuality once again on the table. And today, Women for Afghan Women will take this as an opportunity to lead in this conversation and work with others to bring about change, not only in our community, but in the mindset of so many others.
Thank you, Manisha. And I think what she pointed out with what Women for Afghan Women is doing right now, which is very important in these last few days, is that they're actually talking to the women, their clients, asking them to foster these conversations with their children, talk to them about why they might be sad, why they might be frustrated, issues about sexuality, issues that might lead to social isolation. And I don't think that was happening to the same extent earlier, was it? No. Yeah, so I think it's important to know what organizations like theirs are actually doing on the ground these days. Now we'll hear from Imam Shirzad.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. اولتر از همه اشتراک همه خانواده ها، همه دوستا را در این محفل که در واقعیتش یک محفل درد و غم است خوش آمدید میگوییم.
In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, at the outset, I'd like to thank all the participants in of this event at an occasion of sorrow and pain.
قبل از همه باید بگوییم که کسایی که دست به این جرم و جنایت میزنن به ترور و قتل مردم در هر گوشه هستی، اینا به هیچ دینی، به هیچ آیینی، به هیچ ملت و به هیچ نسل و نشان ارتباط ندارن.
First of all, I'd like to say that those who commit such heinous crimes do not belong to any religion, any nation, or any community.
بلکه عمل شخصی خودشان است. ما با تمام کلمات و تمام احساس خود این عملی را که عمر متین انجام داده، یک جرم، یک جنایت در حق بشریت میدانیم و با شدیدترین کلمات محکوم میکنیم و در عین حال میخواهیم که اینم ذکر بکنم که بیشتری کسایی که قربانی را هر روز میتن در وطن ما، در افغانستان، در کشورهای دیگه اسلامی، هر روز ده ها و صدها قربانی مردم توسط امی افراد و امی قسم از امی کلاس مردم میتن.
We consider this to be a personal act and condemn this heinous crime against humanity in the strongest possible terms. And I'd like to also mention that the same type of people that adhere to the same strand of ideology have been committing and are committing the same types of crimes in our country, in Afghanistan, I guess.
به این لحاظ با جرأت تمام میگم که دینی که ما برش منسوب هستیم، اسلام، قتل را تحریم میکنه، حرام میدانه. ولی کسی که دست به این جرم و به این جنایت میزنه، از نظر دین ما خداوند حکم برشان کرده. حکم خداوند ثابت است و یک تخطی و تخلف است و عقوبت خدا پیش خداوند میبینن.
From a religious standpoint, the crime that has been committed has, from our religious standpoint, it's condemned in our religion, and based on our belief, those that commit such crimes will meet their justice from a religious standpoint or our religious standpoint.
بازم به این نقطه میاییم که چیزی که اتفاق افتاد کنیم، ما در این متاثر هستیم، ما متاثر بودیم و بازم تاکید میکنم بیشتر بر از که مردمایی که به این جرم و جنایت دست میزنن نباید منسوب به یک قوم، به یک مردم، به یک کشور، به یک دین بسازیم، بلکه اینا حدود کشورها را، حدود دین را و حدود انسانیت را شکستن و از تجاوز کردن از این حدود.
I want to come to the same point that we're very saddened by what has happened, and also want to emphasize that those who commit such crimes, deplorable crimes, do not belong and do not represent any nation, any country. What I'd like to mention is that these ideas are transnational, and many across different countries have suffered from this ideology and the acts that the ideology leads to.
ولی چیزی را که درس را که از این عمل بسیار تلخ و ننگین آموختیم همی است که برای ما پدرها برای والدین یک مسئولیت دیگه هست که باید یک گوشی از وقت خود را اختصاص بدیم و همیشه با اولادهای خود نشستایی داشته باشیم، ایدیا و نظریاتشان را بشنویم که راجع به زندگی، راجع به محیط، راجع به ماحول خود چی فکر میکنن تا بتانیم از این طریق قبل از وقوع چنین حوادث با چنین تراژدی ها جلوگیری صورت بگیره.
What we can learn from this tragedy is that we, as in our roles as fathers or parents, we should dedicate some time to sit down with our children and talk to them about what they believe in or what system of belief they adhere to and what their ideas are. Listen to them and do our due diligence to make sure that we take preventive measures so such acts do not take place.
زیادتر از این وقت دوستا رو نمیگیریم. در بخش سوالا هر سوالی که باشه کاملا آزاد انشاءالله در حدود توان خود جواب خواهد دادیم. تشکر میکنم بازم از حضورتان.
I don't want to take too much of your time. In the section that you ask questions, I'm here to answer any questions that you might have, and feel free to ask them.
All right, why don't you go ahead and pass the mic on over. Now we're going to hear from Wajma Osman and Helena Zaweri of the Afgan American Artists and Writers Association.
Thank you, everyone, Mona and Women for Afghan Women, for organizing this. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the events of the past 2 weeks since, or a week and a half since the Orlando massacre and how our group organized. So these are dangerous times to be Muslim, queer, and Afghan. It is dangerous to be different, to be an immigrant, Middle Eastern, Latino, Latina, or South Asian, especially of the Muslim and brown variety. Violence and attacks on LGBTQ and Muslim communities are on an escalating rise, from lone wolf as well as state institutions. I can give you the stats that there are currently over 100 anti-LGBTQ bills circulating across the US, or that hate crimes against Muslims have tripled by 3 times in the last few years. Yet many of us at the intersection of these multiple identities, we don't need the stats to know that Islamophobia and homophobia are getting worse. We feel it at airports, checkpoints, borders, from our families, from our workplaces, from the media. We don't feel safe in our sanctuaries, the dance floor. Our places of worship are under attack, the mosques. As one of the few Afghan American organizations, we felt compelled to respond to the Orlando massacre. We were scared, but we wrote a statement to counter the anti-Muslim rhetoric of media pundits and politicians. They have effectively created a false binary and antagonism between Islam and the West, feeding racist colonial stereotypes of Islam that have gained new currency since 9/11. Muslims have been systematically misrepresented in the mainstream media as innately backwards, misogynist, and homophobic. Not surprisingly, after our statement and petition went public, the first questions we received from journalists were, is Islam compatible with LGBTQ rights and more broadly, human rights in general? Our response was that we are not scholars of Islam. We have other people on this panel who are, but that the Islam we grew up with, the one that our parents and mullahs taught us, is one that stressed charity, humility, and respect for all, regardless of faith, color, or nationality. Then our credentials as Muslims were questioned. When was the last time you went to mosque? Are you practicing? How are you practicing? To say you're culturally Muslim is baffling. It is a complete paradox. Either you're not a Muslim or you have to practice according to their own guidelines of piety. But I will not disavow my Muslimness, nor will I disavow my queerness. Stating Afghan American, Muslim, and queer challenges the dominant narratives and their simplistic interpretations. My Afghan queer friends who have been public and out about their sexuality in the past have been reticent around these times. We are at the crosshairs of many hated groups and communities, under assault from multiple fronts, but we cannot let fear silence us. This is the time to speak up. The voices of progressive people from the global South and the East, especially those impacted the most by the Orlando massacre, Afghans, Latinos, Latinas, Muslims, and queer people of color, must be given the platform, and we must take the mic and speak up. This is the only way to break the boundaries and divisions that politicians and the media are building. Speaking up is the only way to imagine and create an alternative utopic world where the walls they've built between religiosity and secularity, between different genders and sexualities can crumble and dissolve. A world where the forces of love and peace, built on embracing our differences, can dismantle the forces of hate and war. Thank you.
As a group of artists, writers, and intellectuals, the Afghan American Artists and Writers Association was formed in 2011 as an initiative to unsettle the hegemonic narratives and perceptions that exist around Afghan diasporic lives and to embrace the paradoxes of being a diasporic creature. For those who are open to it, we propose tonight that there are alternative ways of thinking about the events of June 12th and its implications. And the stakes of thinking about them differently are very real. These events defy easy causal narratives. In fact, they demand a recognition of complexity, a recognition of the intimate entanglements and intersections between so many different forces. For example, how American notions of masculinity are intimately sewn into the desire to access guns, which cannot be divorced from how the militarization of our local communities and the occupation of foreign lands continues to be glorified, which is connected to the ongoing scapegoating of asylum seekers and immigrants. What does this mean for the political labor of solidarity with the many communities who have been made particularly vulnerable by Orlando's aftermath? To us at AWA, taking an intersectional approach means being able to see how the oppressions that queer people of color, for one, face on a daily basis are not only centered on sexuality, they are deeply inflected by race, class, gender, and empire. Thus, being in solidarity with queer people of color means really listening to the lived experience of everyday oppression and how its textures are different for different people. Being in solidarity is also a deeply reflexive act. To us at AWA, it means understanding how your own privilege has affected the way you interact with the other. Scholars, activists, and everyday people have been saying this for time immemorial, so paying respect to their work is just as critical as working with them. As Afghan Americans, we are no strangers to being questioned about the seemingly irreconcilable paradoxes that animate our lives and identities. And so for us, solidarity first means understanding the forces that have pulled us into the discursive aftermath of Orlando without our consent, but then using it as an opportunity to highlight the many ways of living that defy the easy logics into which we have been scripted. I want to end with a quote from one of our founding members, Sahad Muradi, who couldn't be here tonight, but which we felt perfectly sums up our ethos of solidarity. The lives of queers of color, queer women of color, and trans people of color are at risk every day, everywhere. That structural violence ensures their bodies are policed, beaten, incarcerated, erased. We need to recognize that this violence is not separate from histories of patriarchy, colonization, capitalism, imperialism, militarization, and occupation. that all folks living, working, fighting, dying for justice and liberation of sentient beings, our struggles are bound. I will work harder in my own communities for the dignity of all to love freely, and I will listen, I will listen, I will listen. Thank you.
All right. Now we're going to hear from Faisal Alam, who is a founding member of the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity.
In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most gracious. Assalamu alaikum. I come here today as a Muslim, as a queer person, and as an immigrant of Pakistani heritage. Being queer, Muslim, and Pakistani are three integral parts of my identity, but this complex milieu of intersections do not neatly fit into any box or into a narrative that most mainstream society wants to tell. On Sunday, June 12th, I was having brunch with a dear friend who was visiting. Suddenly, my phone was ringing. I was receiving dozens of text messages and my email was full. An attack on Orlando had happened. It was a gay club. It was Latin night. The attacker was killed and he was identified as someone with a Muslim-sounding name. It was at this moment that I knew our community would be under attack. But this time it would be different. This time not only would I have to defend attacks against my faith, but I would have to talk about how and why a Muslim man would go into a gay bar and in one night kill 49 people, leave more than 50 others mortally wounded, and dozens more in terror. Since June 12th, the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity, of which I'm a founding member, which is an all-volunteer organization, has received dozens of media requests from reporters wanting to speak to LGBT Muslims. We have signed on to solidarity statements, been on conference calls with allies within the LGBT and Muslim communities, and our world has suddenly been changed. We have gone from being invisible to hypervisible, and the toll that this hypervisibility has taken is not yet clear. But what is clear is that this is a pivotal moment for every marginalized community that was impacted by what happened in Orlando. Political and social concerns that did not seemingly impact us are suddenly issues that we need to grapple with. Gun control, mental health, homophobia within Muslim communities, immigration and the lack of support for the undocumented, toxic patriarchy in American society, quote unquote terrorism, Islamophobia within LGBT communities, violence against women. As Muslims, as immigrants, as LGBT people, and as members of numerous marginalized communities, this is a historic opportunity to join forces, to look deeply within ourselves and our communities, and to examine the prejudice that many of us hold, to understand how each of our communities is linked to each other, and to stand in solidarity with each other, and to reject the violence against women, the patriarchy that our society is entrenched in, the homophobia, the intolerance, and the religious extremism. To LGBT, queer, Latinx communities, I want to say that I see you. I recognize the deep pain that you're enduring, and I see the invisibility of queer Latinx voices in mainstream media, and we are troubled by that. The LGBT Muslim community stands in solidarity with you, and we will always stand by your side because we know that your voices and your stories need to be centered in any dialogue about the Orlando attack. To LGBT people who are not Muslim, this is the time for us to examine the level of Islamophobia that is rooted within our communities, the racism and xenophobia that so many queer people of color and white allies have been trying to bring to light. We have to examine our prejudices and how this has impacted marginalized communities. To non-LGBT Muslims, so many of you have stood up and spoken out about Orlando. You have taken positions of solidarity within your communities for LGBT Muslims, often to the detriment of your own standing. I also see you, and so do the thousands of LGBT Muslims across the country. You are confronting homophobia and speaking out about the rejection of LGBT Muslims from the larger Muslim community. And I stand ready to work with you as we challenge our Muslim communities to finally welcome us. and for those non-LGBT Muslims who have not stood up and spoken out. I ask you to examine your silence. What is preventing you from addressing the roots of homophobia within your community? Where does it come from? What is the fear that holds you back from accepting your gay or lesbian child? Do you see the pain that surrounds you? Do you see the daily emotional, spiritual, and physical violence that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people endure each and every day? Can you relate to it? If you've been the victim of Islamophobia, then you can be empathetic to the homophobia that we endure on a daily basis. And to Muslim civic and religious leaders, I ask you, do you not see the pain of LGBT Muslims in your community? Do you not see the toll that rejection and ostracizing has taken? Are you ready to open your mosque doors to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender Muslims? Are you willing to sit down and hear the stories of suffering and pain and courage and resilience of LGBT Muslims? Are you willing to sit at the table as we grapple with the many challenges of countering Islamophobia and countering legislative action that would put all of our names on terrorist and no-fly lists? Are you willing and able to stop hiding behind verses of the Quran or hadith or theology? Will you come to the table with an open mind and open heart and learn about the concerns facing LGBT Muslims? I want to close with a hadith or a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, who said that if you see oppression happening anywhere, stop it with your own hands. And so the companions of the Prophet asked him, "O Prophet, what if we cannot see the oppression or we cannot stop it with our own hands?" And he replied, "Then feel it in your heart that what you have seen is wrong." So I call on each of us to stand up to any oppression that we see, wherever we see it, in whatever community we see it. Stand up and speak out, because any conversation about Islamophobia, homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, sexism, or misogyny cannot occur unless each of these concerns are addressed together. And I look forward to standing side by side with each of you in this room and on this platform as we move our communities towards greater acceptance and deeper accountability in the vision of building a world that is just, loving, and peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Just want to we're running behind, I've been told, so I'd just like to respectfully ask our remaining speakers if they could just try to keep it brief if possible so we can get to the Q&A. Thank you. And now this is Veronica Bayetti Flores. She's the board co-president with the National Network of Abortion Funds and co-host of the Latinx podcast Radio Menea.
Hi, y'all. The events on Sunday, June 12th, were extremely personal for me as a queer Latina. And when I first heard about them, it was not reported that it was Latino night at the club that it occurred at. And when I found out, it hit me really hard, but I was at work. It was the end of a conference, and I tried to put it out of my mind. It wasn't until the first 4 names were released that it really hit me, and I realized that they were names like mine. And as a person who's an immigrant and who has a really complicated relationship to home, queer clubs on Latin night is one of the few places where I felt that feeling of home. So it felt like it was very, very personal. And as soon as I was able to sort of deal with it and not just dissociate, it became very clear to me that what happened on that night was actually part of a much longer legacy of violence against LGBTQ people of color and LGBTQ Latinos. Violence that is very often at the hands of the state. LGBTQ Latinos experience violence on a daily basis at the hands of immigration, law enforcement, at the hands of the police. We need to talk about the ways that detention and deportation, and even today's Supreme Court ruling that holds the injunction on DAPA and DACA affects LGBTQ Latinos. Those were victories that were won by mostly the work of undocumented young people, many of whom were queer Latinos. And we need to contextualize the violence that happened on that night with the violence that LGBTQ Latinos experience on a daily basis, including, for example, the scandal that's rocking the Oakland Police Department currently, which is a statutory rape scandal with a young queer Latina who was consistently raped by several officers on the force and who traded sex to survive, so they knew she was disposable. We have an endemic set of murders of trans women of color, many of whom are Latina as well, and I saw these attacks as just part of that legacy, and of that legacy of violence happening with LGBTQ people of color. And for me, seeing the news coverage, seeing the ways that politicians have reacted with just deep xenophobia and deep Islamophobia, it has become incredibly important as a queer Latina myself to make sure that I say out loud every chance I get that my pain will not be used to further this narrative. It cannot, like, our community's pain won't be used to fuel further war. It won't be fueled to put people on more lists. It won't be fueled for any of that. We do not want that, not in our names.
Thank you, Veronica. Now we'll hear from Lakshman Kalasapudi. He is the chair at Saga NYC for LGBTQ South Asians.
Hi, everyone. So, again, on the morning of June 12th, you know, I heard the news. I unfortunately got up really early on a Sunday morning, and I kind of kept reading the news, and it was really, really terrible for me. But then I kept hoping, and this is what Sadia Afjani said of Masjid, I kept hoping the name wasn't going to be a Muslim name. And I'm not Muslim, I'm Hindu, but our communities are like intimately connected. So, like Manisha said, the killer was born in, could be from a Flushing, Fresh Meadows community. He was born at LIJ, Long Island Jewish, Northwell Health. I live a few blocks away from that hospital. I grew up in that neighborhood. That neighborhood is New Hyde Park, Floral Park, Queens, Long Island border. And that hit home. And then it also hit home to me that, you know, I was also bullied in that neighborhood, in a very predominantly South Asian neighborhood, for being gay. For during 6th grade, 7th grade at MS 172, I'm calling it out. But it's, you know, like my middle school was 50% South Asian. We had South Asians, and we still have South Asians of Hindu origin, Muslim origin, Sikh origin, and Christian origin, all South Asians, speaking a variety of different languages. And also in that neighborhood is there, on the corner of Langdale Avenue and 80th Avenue, Langdale Street and 80th Avenue, is a Pakistani mosque and a Jain temple and a Hindu temple all in one building. You know, just because I'm Hindu doesn't mean that we don't share literally a wall with a mosque. I also work in a bigger mosque, in a separate mosque in other parts of Queens. So all of these communities are, you know, we're essentially one. And, you know, I saw it as a great call to action to start opening up these conversations, not only in, you know, Greenwich Village in Manhattan and Judson Memorial Church, but then in New Hyde Park, in Jamaica, in Flushing, in Jackson Heights, in South Ozone Park, and Richmond Hill, where these, like, you know, our parents aren't, sometimes they're not exposed to these issues. So having these conversations in our own mother tongues, in our vernacular, so think about what it means to say sexualities or genders, not just in English. So if they respond to you in your mother tongue, you don't respond back in English. You know, you respond in your mother tongue and then push yourself to even conceptualize how to express alternative genders and sexualities in your mother tongue. And personally, for me, it became a great call to action to go back to MS 172, my middle school, not only from not only by myself, but my 6th grade classmate, who's a very reputed queer Muslim artist in New York City, and go in there together and talk to youth in our community, because they're our aunties and uncles' children, to say this is how we can envision how we can be both Muslim and queer, Hindu and queer, Sikh and queer, Christian and queer, and so on. And so this is my call to action to each one of you to go back to whatever communities that you come from, and whatever languages that you speak, to kind of take this conversation from here to there.
Thank you, Lakshman. Now we're going to hear from Shalini Somayaji. She is the Executive Director of Sakhi for South Asian Women.
Good evening, everyone. At Sakhi for South Asian Women, we are dedicated to ending violence within our communities here in New York City. Too often, when we talk about domestic violence, we treat it as a family matter, a private matter, instead of what it truly is. It's a community issue that impacts us all. Studies show that past violence is a predictor of future violence, and young males who grow up in violent homes are 4 times more likely to use violence as a tool when they grow up. Our work around anti-violence, dismantling notions of gender norms, as well as creating communities of support, feel especially important during these difficult times. Today I come to you to speak more about what we as individuals can do in our daily lives when we're faced with seemingly overwhelming news, racism, homophobia, gender-based violence. When we do speak, though, often we are met with judgment, especially in our work. Don't make the community look bad. Don't break up the family. So we wonder, with all these judgments that come at us, why we remain silent. So at Sakhi, we start with the simple act of listening. It's a powerful and often overlooked tool when we're seeking answers. So when you're checking in with your loved ones, don't rush. Say, hey, how are you? Fine, fine. I think we all do that on a daily basis. We just obligatory say, fine, fine. But when you ask, really ask, how are you? And be ready to listen with openness. Because I find that in these moments of space is when someone will feel comfortable to disclose what they truly are going through. Be it that they're experiencing violence in their homes, questioning their sexuality, or feelings of sadness. Or on the flip side, they can share their hopes and dreams as well. So I really am impressed by the turnout tonight, because it starts with creating these types of spaces here where we gather to support, learn from each other, and listen to each other. That is an integral part in the healing process. And the process of creating environments where we all can live openly, authentically, and with dignity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shalini. Now we're going to hear from Maureen Ahmed. Is that you over there? It's very far. She's a board member with Turning Point for Women and Families.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning, good evening. I'm here today under the gravest and unfortunate aftermaths of a terrible tragedy. On behalf of Turning Point, the organization on which I'm a board of, I would like to express our heartfelt condolences for the families, friends, and loved ones of all the beautiful souls that were killed or injured last week in the Orlando massacre. I cannot imagine what the families are going through right now, or how those who made it out alive are feeling. But I am slightly warmed tonight to know that we are all here to condemn this hateful crime and express our solidarity for those who have left us all too soon. As some of you may know, Turning Point for Women and Families is a community-based nonprofit organization that works to address domestic violence within the Muslim community here in New York City. I joined the board in 2014 because I wanted to support an organization that helped women empower themselves and find their own voices, which is what Turning Point does every day. From my experiences in volunteering amongst the board and working with our executive director, Rubina Niaz, I found out a lot about the difficulties that the Muslim community faces here every day. In the face of this particular tragedy, I'm reminded that violence is systemic, rooted, and intersectional in all its forms. What happened a week and a half ago was an example of cyclical violence and demonstrated to us that domestic violence, which we all now know that the murderer was a perpetrator of, can be connected to greater violences like mass murders and gun shootings. Take this statistic, for example. The organization Every Town for Gun Safety analyzed FBI data on mass shootings from 2009 to 2015 and found that 16% of the attackers had previously been charged with domestic violence. While this statistic itself doesn't demonstrate a clear correlation, we can all agree on one thing. As long as there's violence occurring within our communities, within our homes, our streets and our communities will not be safe. As organizations working on helping our communities become safer, we all need to collectively continue focusing on ending domestic violence to prevent bigger tragedies like this. Hate crimes like the Orlando massacre are not isolated incidents. This is one of the many hate crimes that we have seen in the past year. In the post 9/11 era, the LGBTQ and Latino communities have provided and continue to provide unconditional and unequivocal support to the Muslim community. It is our turn, and in my opinion, long overdue, that the Muslim community returns the same, and in that fervor. We must continue to show solidarity to the LGBTQ community and work to ensure that our spaces are inclusive, irrespective of gender, race, religion, and sexual orientation. This means that we must give light to their presence, their needs, and acknowledge their rich contributions to our extended community. In the aftermath and in our mourning, let us now start asking ourselves really tough questions and find ways to challenge our institutions, including our mosques, communities, and shelters, to become a more welcoming space. We want people to come together rather than divided in this time. Let's all make sure we're all doing our part to ensure that this never happens again. Thank you.
Iman Bukadum is the Director of Community Partnerships at the Interfaith Center of New York.
Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings. Good evening. I wanted to thank Afghan Women for this very important event, and I also wanted to thank Judson Church for always creating an open and important space for us to always feel like we can always come here together to do important work when the world outside seems so chaotic. And so as was stated, my name is Iman Bukadum. I'm the director of the Interfaith Center of New York. I'm a Muslim woman. I'm a straight woman. I'm also the daughter of immigrants who came from Algeria. And when this event happened in Orlando, the first thing I thought was, the same thing that so many on this panel thought: please let it be anyone but a Muslim person. And of course it was a Muslim person. And it got me thinking about my own upbringing and my own childhood and my own community. And it got me thinking about Mr. Mateen himself and why he would do what he did and what we could have done to prevent this. And I really think that there are a couple of reasons for why he did what he did. I don't know why he did what he did, but I think that one of the reasons was because he didn't feel like he could be vulnerable. He didn't feel like he could express himself as he felt. And I don't think that's because of Islam necessarily. I don't think that's necessarily because of his Afghan identity. But there are strains within our Muslim communities that don't allow our men and our women to express their identities. We have to be honest about that. And so I stand here as a straight Muslim woman, as an ally, to my LGBTQI sisters and brothers. Unequivocally, unconditionally in support. I accept you as you are. And I want you to just be how you are. And I think that's the only way for us to be able to have genuine spaces where people can really feel like they can be comfortable expressing themselves. And I think we really have to start moving towards doing the hard work of creating those spaces, because there aren't enough of those spaces for immigrant communities, particularly immigrant Muslim communities. Because I remember in my childhood, I don't think we had any. And I have a lot of gay Muslim friends, and they don't really hang out with other Muslims. And they only told me after. After we were adults. And that was because they realized that I was like a cool Muslim or something, you know. So it's really important. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Iman. Lieutenant Adil Rana.
Good evening. I'd just like to say first to the Afghan women, for women, for hosting such an event and acknowledging an issue, to get a solution for any problem or issue, you have to acknowledge that you have a problem. So, this is a great platform to actually come out and acknowledge that there is an issue, there is a problem, and let's concentrate on eliminating or addressing that issue or the problem, that that gap or that misunderstanding that you might have, whether it's with the LGBT community or whether it's with the Muslim community in general. There are good and bad in every community, and we cannot just tarnish everyone just because of few bad. So that's a great forum, and hearing all these individuals speak. And I think most of them spoke from the heart, if not everybody. And it touches you. It makes you want to do something more than what is being done or being thought of. So I think it's a great platform. I know we're running on time, but I just want to say congratulations, and all the people that are here, all the people on the forum. With the different background, different religious nationality, sex, gender, and acknowledging and opening the arms to work with each other. I think that's a great step, and I think let's move forward to a better future.
Thank you, Lieutenant. And finally, we're going to hear from Kristen L. Rouse. She is a U.S. Army veteran, a member of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and she is founding director of the NYC Veterans Alliance.
Good evening. I served 3 tours of duty as a soldier in Afghanistan. I worked alongside Afghan troops, helping to secure the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I grew up just outside of Orlando, and I first found my way as a young lesbian in Orlando's gay club scene. A few days ago, an Army Reserve captain and an Army National Guard enlisted soldier were among those killed, not in Iraq or Afghanistan, but in a gay club in my hometown. And we've heard the familiar judgments from hardline religious leaders, many from the evangelical Christian community in which I was raised, saying that this was provoked, an act of divine justice. It is painfully apparent to me that there are people in my midst who simply want me dead. Just a few months ago, here in New York, a man yelled at my girlfriend and I, "You faggots should die and go to hell." Anti-gay harassment is nothing new, and we know all too well that the deadliest threats come at close range. Petty Officer 3rd Class Alan Schindler was murdered by his fellow sailors for being gay. Private 1st Class Barry Winchell murdered by his fellow soldiers for dating a transgendered woman. My classmate from grade school, Eric Chris, left a gay bar in Tallahassee, Florida, with a man he met there, who strangled him with a lamp cord and left his body in a dumpster. And Matthew Shepard, tortured, raped, and strung on a fence by two men he met at a gay bar. It comes as no surprise that Omar Mateen was a regular at Pulse Orlando. The deadliest hate does not originate with Islam or any other faith. It is self-hate turned outward. It is long past time for all of us to change the story. My fellow members of the queer community, stand tall and strong. You are beautiful and equal in every way to every other American. My friends and neighbors who are Afghan American, who are Muslim, especially my queer brothers and sisters, I urge you, demand nothing short of acceptance and equality within your families, your places of worship, and in this country where freedom of religion must apply to all of us. My fellow Americans, I urge you, I implore you, stand up for us, accept us, have our backs, reject the slurs, the derogatory jokes, the archaic religious condemnations. Reject any notions that reinforce second-class citizenship or selfhood for anyone. The country I stood for against enemies abroad, the country whose flag I wore proudly on my shoulder for 31 months in a combat zone, this country stands for freedom and equality for all of us. Stand with us and make this a reality.
All right, folks, so this is the question portion. We have a question that was submitted by card. If any of you have more questions that have come up, you can ask using one of the microphones or write on a card. We have one that has been submitted. I'm going to read it out here. There's a lot of talk that Islam is by itself and, quote, by the book, homophobic. Is this true? And if so, how do you reconcile Western values, re equal rights for gay people, with living a, quote, pious or good life? Anybody want to take that question? Faisal, I think you can take that question. You and I have kind of talked a little about this. You have a mic?
Yeah, so that's like a 4-day conference to happen, right? So what the
40 seconds.
The quick answer is that Islam is not a monolithic religion, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. There's this country called Saudi Arabia that has exported Wahhabi Islam, and the United States supports Saudi Arabia with billions of dollars in money. And so the answer lies in the heart of the Middle East, unfortunately. And there's a history of same-sex desire and love throughout Islamic history. And so examine our faith a little deeper, and you will find that nothing is as black and white as it seems. There's more gray than there is what people are saying.
Thank you, and thanks for keeping it brief. I know that's tough, but I'm going to ask brief questions and brief answers of everybody. If you want to stand up and ask a question, ma'am. Do we have a microphone nearby? Anybody? Right behind you. And if you could just introduce yourself if you're comfortable doing that.
Okay, so my name is Sabah Ismail and I'm from Pakistan, from Peshawar, and I actually run an organization called Aware Girls, which is a young women-led organization working for women empowerment and gender equality. First of all, I really am thankful to the organizers because I was blown away when I heard an imam reciting verses from Quran in a church, and I think it's really important for me because I come from Peshawar in Pakistan, and where Pakistan is a Sunni dominant country, and even there is no acceptance for people who have different beliefs. For example, Shia or Ahmadis and Hazara community has been targeted in Pakistan, and just 2 days ago an Ahmadi doctor was killed because he has different beliefs and he has different thoughts. so I was really blown away when I was hearing the holy verses in a church, and I think it's really important that we do promote this culture in our countries, in Pakistan as well. So my question actually is from the Imam, and I can ask in Pashto directly if because I see that you understand Pashto. زما سوال تاسو نه دا دی چې کله بله پاکستان کې همیشه نه زه وړوکوال نه لویه شوې یم او موږ ته دغه ویل کېږي چې هوموسیکشوالټي چې کوم ده نو هغه یو جرم دی او هغه د خدای طرف نه مطلب دې خلکو باندې یو ګناه ده دا او دا خلک چې کوم دي دوی ته دا سزا ورکړل شوې ده چې دوی به داسې فارم کې چې ټرانسجنډر کمیونټي ده یا لیزبینز چې کوم دي او زه چونکې ټرانسجنډر سره کار کوم نو زما صرف دا کوېشن دی چې زه څنګه خلکو ته دا باور کړم چې زموږ مذهب چې کوم دی نو هغه نفرت نه پیلاوي بلکې هغه د دې خلکو اکسپټیبلیټي دپاره هم خبره کوي نو آیا قرآن کې داسې څه ورسز شته یا داسې څه احادیث شته چې کوم زه خپل کار کې استعمالولی شم thank you.
Ask for a translation of the question, please. I only got the first word or two. Who's willing to offer? You want to go ahead and offer the translation yourself?
But yeah, I can do the translations. Yeah, well, so my question is because I also work with the transgenders and LGBTI community in Peshawar, and it's very risky actually to work, and there are a lot of obstacles when I work. So my question is there anything from the Quran, anything from the ahadith that I can use in my work that homosexuality is not a sin, or like there is more acceptability and homosexuals are also humans? So what can I use from the Quran?
Did everybody hear the question back there? What can she as an activist use in when she's speaking to people from the Quran or from the hadiths, the stories of the Prophet Muhammad, in dealing with issues of being people who are transgender? How can she give them some hope?
یقینا نه تنها از اسلام بلکه تمام ادیان سماوی دستور مشترکی دارند که هدایت خداوند است به حیث خالق انسان. اسلام اجازه نمیده و راههای درستی را هم برای ما تفهیم کرده تا از او طریق ضروریات نفسی انسانها رفع شود.
Definitely, not only Islam, but all religions that come from God does not allow for it within any religion. However, in the meantime, there are ways where human needs can be accommodated.
به خاطر که یگانه ذاتی که ادعای خلقت انسان را میکنه خداوند است. خداوند اعلان میکنه که ما خلق کردیم انسان را و وقتی که در زندگی و معاملات دنیایی خود میبینیم هر کسی که چیزی را پیدا کرده خلق کرده بر از یک قانونی وضع کرده.
The philosophy behind it is that God is the creator, and any time that and somebody is created obviously by God in this case, there has to be some rules that are put in place in order to guide the creation of God.
ما دستور خداوند برای کلگی میگوییم ولی انسانها آزادی خود را دارند.
Our job is to relay the message of God, but in the meantime human beings have their own freedom.
هر کسی که هر عملی را میکنه خودش جوابدیه هست در پیش خداوند.
Anybody that takes any initiative or commits any type of act or decides to do something is him or herself responsible for his or her own actions to God or in front of God.
به می لحاظ به حساب مذهب نی فرقه ها و گروپ ها نی بلکه جنرالی به عنوان دین چیزی هست که خداوند منع کرده و ای که افراد نظریات داره کار خودشان است ولی بازم تاکید میکنم که هر کسی که هر عملی را خوب یا خراب میکنه خودش مسئول است پیش خداوند ولی ما حق نداریم که به زور کسی را مانع شویم و از راه برای دیگه ببریم.
Generally speaking, God has forbidden such acts, but I want to emphasize that, again, as individuals living in any society, everyone is responsible for their own actions, and we're not obliged to force our beliefs on others.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hi. Hello. I can project. I just wanted to clarify that last question from the Imam Sherzad, please. So are you saying that, I'd like to know, as a Muslim, if I accept members of my family and my friends who are gay, is that something that works and it's sort of like the question that was asked before, how do I live a pious and good life and be accepting and not just tolerant, but actually loving towards my gay brothers and sisters?
از قرآن براتون کوت میکنم.
I'm going to quote from the Quran.
خداوند قصه یکی از پیغمبرای خود را میکنه.
It's the story about one of God's prophets.
حضرت لوط علیه السلام.
And that's one of the prophets, Lut alayhi salam. Anybody jump in? I'm sorry.
خانم حضرت لوط از مردم گی بودک.
Lut alayhi salam, this prophet that the Imam is referencing, was gay.
ولی با خانه و با زندگی حضرت لوط علیه السلام بود. از این لحاظ من میگم که در خود سوسایتی، در بین اجتماع، در بین فامیل، در بین خانواده ها یکی در برابر دیگه مسئولیت داریم، خصوصا در جامعه که مسلمان ها هست، نه در به صورت عموم که ما سر کل مردم باید همون چیزی را که خود ما عقیده داریم دیگران مجبور بسازیم پورا بقبولن. این غلط است و در اسلام نیست.
We have certain obligations and rules within the Islamic community or society, but in the meantime, we don't have to necessarily force others to believe our beliefs are, what we believe in.
به همون لحاظ وقتی که حضرت یک پیغمبری از پیغمبرای خدا با خانم خود زندگی داره، ما در اجتماع و در سوسایتی با مردمی که هر نوع عمل داره یا به هر راهی که روان هستند، بیس انسان، بیس همنوع خود، بیس دوست خود تماس می داشته باشیم، گپ میزنیم، سخنایی را تبادل میکنیم.
The Imam cited the Prophet as an example, and along the same lines, if a Prophet in Islam can coexist and have a relationship with his family members who is different from him or of a different, identifies with a different sexuality, we can also coexist and exchange ideas and sit down and talk with those who are different from us.
نه به زور نه به قهر، ولی به شکل نرم با اخلاق خوب با دلایل صحبت میکنیم، ولی حق میدیمش که در اجتماع ما در اطراف ما زندگی داشته باشه و زنده باشه.
Not with force, not with anger, but we could sit down logically, talk to one another, and coexist, and we can exist side by side.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few things to that. One is that, and I think the Imam's pointing this out, is that the monotheistic religions, all three of them, if you interpret the texts, be it the Quran or the Hadiths, in a specific way, they're all homophobic. That's just a fact across the board. But the interpretations of it are different, and so are the daily practices that people do in their everyday lives. And so that's something to keep in mind is, Helena pointed out in her talk that this is the paradoxes of identity, that there's many differences in Islam and that we don't have to accept one interpretation. There's multiple. There's mullahs and imams there's some that actually, accept and support homosexuality and LGBTQ rights, and then there's others that don't. And so who we choose to highlight is really important, as especially during this time, is not to only highlight one particular interpretation or group of people, but across the board, from the more progressive interpretations to the more hardline, strict interpretations. And I just want to end on one anecdotal thing. My sister, who's here, Leymam, and we had a mullah, and we all read the Quran when we were younger, and our mullah told her not to draw, not to paint. She's been an artist ever since she was little, because in the Quran, you're not supposed to have icons, right? So you're not supposed to have representations of the human body. And she's a painter now. She's an artist, she's a printmaker, and she did that. And that's something that my parents allowed and enabled us to do. And so that's just one example of the difference. And so don't make one person representative of all of us, because we are very different.
I want to ask a question of either anybody who's on the panel, or if somebody from the audience wants to answer this. Does anybody here who identifies as LGBTQ Muslim feel that they have a mosque or a space which they are welcome in and feel completely embraced with full knowledge of their sexual identity? Are you raising your hand in answer to this? Okay. Do you want to answer that? If you could get the mic back there.
I can enunciate. Or I can use this. Assalamu alaikum. Yes and no. Yes, in terms of unofficially, I have participated and helped create a space for LGBTQ identified Muslims to break fast during this holy month, but also have Quranic studies and hang out and do the things that people do when they're of faith. And we've done that informally for the last couple years here in New York. It's invite only, you gotta know people who know people to participate in that. But that's one way that we've been able to be in an ad hoc manner of service to our community. The Islamic Center at NYU comes close, but I don't know if the Imam is here.
Khalid Latif?
Yeah.
I don't think he's here, is he?
So for those that know Khalid, he's great, but hasn't formally supported us. It's more of a tolerant position. He acknowledges us and is cool with it, but it would be nice from the khutbah one day to have a firm, we support you, we stand side by side to you. So if you're listening or any of your people are, make a note of that. And but that for me is one of the better environments. But we have created these spaces where we can. Oppressed people always find ways to resist and are resilient, and will always figure out how to worship in community, even when there's no formal space. And let us remind ourselves that the first mosque wasn't built right away. People were praying in community, in homes, in the Prophet's homes, peace be upon him, and elsewhere. So it doesn't need a physical structure. So we're going artisanal, throwing back to our roots. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Yeah, but let me ask a follow-up. If somebody who's here or not here wants to be part of this, how do they get in touch with you or any of your?
If you know me, then you should be a part of it. If you know me and don't like me, I'm sorry. I can put you in touch with other people, and you could approach me in the next 5 minutes because I'm going to go to that iftar afterwards that you're not all invited to. I'm sorry.
Okay, that was sort of an answer. Okay. All right. We have a question up here.
I'm Rubina Niaz from Turning Point, and I don't have a question. I just want us to be reminded that in Islam, as in all other faiths, humanity trumps everything else. And we are first, we owe it first to our fellow brothers and sisters to be human. I grew up in a Muslim home as a Muslim. I'm a straight woman, but we were reminded every day that to call ourselves Muslims, we have to be good human beings first, which means we have to want for others what we want for ourselves. And for centuries and for decades that I have been working against domestic violence, Quranic verses have been used to justify abuse of women. And one thing that Islam encourages is scholarship and understanding of the Quran. We have to, there'll be interpretations after interpretations. And my personal view is that verse that is used to justify violence against women has a very patriarchal interpretation. And so we really have to go deeper within ourselves and ask ourselves, is it our comfort zone that is preventing us from embracing every other human being? We're not responsible for their behavior, we're responsible for ours. And are we doing the right thing as human beings? And I think it's really important to come together as a human community. We know the Prophet has reminded us that if one innocent life is taken, it's like you've taken the entire humanity. And so we have to remind ourselves of those basic rights. Even just yesterday, I was reading something that the Prophet upheld, and somebody went to him and asked about pillars of Islam and said, what is our first duty? Is it to fast? Is it to pray? Is it to do Hajj? And the Prophet kept saying no to each one of them. And then one of his Sahabas, his friend, said, well then, Ya Rasulallah, you tell us, what is it? And he said, to be the best human being that we can be. And so I just want all of us to be reminded of that. And it doesn't matter what our sexual orientation is. It doesn't matter which country we come from, what faith we practice. Our duty is to embrace each other as human beings and leave judgment to Allah. If we believe, we are reminded not to be judgmental, not to judge other people, lest they judge us. So let's leave judgment to Allah and do the right thing by each other as human beings. I had
Thank
to
you,
just say
Rubina.
that. Thank you.
How much time do we have, first of all? 10 minutes? Okay, great. Gentleman right here in the aisle, do you have a question? Maybe you can get a mic to him.
I would just like to ask, I'm not sure if the woman is named Cassandra or not, but she had this gift and the bane of being able to predict the future, but nobody believing her. So I'm asking the people on the panel, if you had a young man, the man who was the assassin, if you had that young man come to you today and by some means knew his struggles, knew what was going on in his head, what resources exist that you could direct him to? What would you say to him? Would the resources be within the LGBT community? Would they be within Islamic infrastructure? How would you redirect this young man so that he didn't go down the same path he chose?
It's a great question. Who wants to take that? Any of the advocates up here? Brother Shahzad, would you like to?
خداوند در قرآن اعلان میکنه مثل که خواهرم بیشتر صحبت کردن ولقد خلقنا بنی آدم میگه ما کل فرزندای آدم را با عزت و با کرامت خلق کردیم.
God says in the Quran, as our sister mentioned earlier, that I have created all Adam's children with dignity.
و با کرامت و با بزرگی و عزت پیدا کردیمشون. گفتیم بله. و این کرامت و بزرگی تنها برای مسلمان و غیر مسلمان نیست. به عنوان انسان تمام کسایی که پیدا شده صاحب بزرگی، صاحب رفعت، صاحب مقام در دین است.
The dignity and greatness that is mentioned in the Quran for all humanity is not only specific to those who are Muslim, but it's for the whole humanity.
اگر جوانی که این جرم و جنایت مرتکب شد پیش ما می بود برش می گفتیم که انسان با عزت و با کرامت و با آزادی خلق شده و هر کس مسئولیت کار خود است، مسئولیت خود را داره.
Had I come across this young man, and if I would have advised him that every human being is born with dignity, greatness, and respect, as per God, and everyone has a responsibility towards his own actions.
چرا پیغمبر صلی الله علیه وسلم در جزی از حدیث میفرماید که اگر یک عمل خراب را در بین اجتماع دیدی که مردم میکنه از نظر ایمان، از نظر عقیده و از نظر راهت، اقلا در قلبت راضی نباش ولی بگذاریشون، هر کس خودش میفهمه کارش.
As per the saying of, as per the section of a saying of the Prophet, if you see that somebody committing an action that you don't agree with, and you consider it to be a bad action, you don't necessarily, even if you disagree with it, you don't show that in an action, but you just keep it in your heart that you disagree with it, taking into account the dignity, greatness, and respect that everybody is entitled to.
Thank you. We have a question down here. Okay, somebody has the mic. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. My name is Sao Huang. I'm a professor in Women and Gender Studies Department at Hunter College, and I'm also a public health research scientist. And my question is, are there any specific actions that I can take, if any, as an ally, as someone who is in the LGBT community, who's a person of color, and who's not Muslim, to support the greater inclusion of LGBT people in Muslim communities, et cetera, and LGBT Muslims in general?
Who'd like to take that question up here? Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your question. Well, one concrete thing that we might be able to offer, at least on behalf of our group, is we have a petition circulating on moveon.org, is that right? Which is an official statement that addresses specifically the different forms of Islamophobia and homophobia that have been brought to light after the Orlando events. So one sort of small step is to, if you'd like, sign the petition. But on a broader level, your question made me think about something else that allies of the Muslim community and the Muslim queer community might consider doing, and it really encompasses changing the way that we think about what queer liberation means and what it means for different people. And it brings up the role of pinkwashing. I don't know how many people are familiar with that term, but it is this idea of erecting a sort of false dichotomy between the West and the Muslim world, in which the West is situated as a mecca of queer rights, and the Muslim world is situated as a site where queer rights are corroded, where homophobia is rampant, and where Islam and queerness can never coexist. And I think some of the questions tonight are sort of symptomatic of that binary that still inheres very much within our everyday discourse. So one thing that people might consider doing is to learn more about pinkwashing, to learn more about how they can undo this dichotomy in their everyday conversations with people, to understand, as Faisal very importantly mentioned, the colonial histories behind the category of homosexuality within the Muslim world that is actually a product of European colonialism, to sort of, and I'm sure you're probably familiar with some of this given your academic background, but just for everybody to sort of think about educating themselves about that and to not reproduce the binaries between the West and Islam. So.
Did that answer your question? Or did you want to follow up on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the spirit of the question is right on, and I think the larger question becomes how much does tracing it back historically, how does that actually service kind of contemporary activist and political efforts towards sort of enabling queer people of color to have dignified lives. And sometimes tracing it back to history can be too much, or it sort of detracts from the present. But I think it is important. I think it's important to understand because it reveals to us that these communities are not insular ones, that they're part and parcel of the American social fabric, and that they're very much connected to historical forces that have been a part of American history, including the disenfranchisement of indigenous populations for a really, really long time. But yeah, I absolutely appreciate the spirit of your question.
One last question, or go ahead.
I just want to say one thing that we haven't really addressed is 3 main points which really relate to what happened in Orlando. Mental health issues, the ability to buy a gun over the counter within 10 minutes, and domestic violence. Domestic violence has been linked to mass shootings on so many occasions, so that's one thing that really needs to be addressed. Mental health needs to be addressed to have an outlet. Like if you are repressed or if you're facing whatever you're facing within your community, there needs to be a space. If you can't speak to anyone, at least if there's an organization that allows for counseling, for somewhere for you to at least vent, whatever it may be, to provide circles. And then also, one action we can all take is lobby against the NRA, lobby against the gun laws. I mean, 50 people were just killed, and there are hundreds in the hospital because of one shooting, and days later, there's still, they voted against gun laws. So it works. Contact your officials. I mean, that's one thing we can all do. Get involved on a grassroots level, whether we're speaking about domestic violence, whether we even share our stories, to even bring a story to light and find a common thread between someone in your community who might be LGBTQ and yourself. We all have a common thread, and to get to know someone personally allows you to accept them more than for them to just be a person who you don't know anything about. So I just wanted to say that I think mental health really needs to be addressed. All of this doesn't, stem from religion. It doesn't stem from, it doesn't. It stems from, a whole host of things. So that, I just wanted to make that point.
And by the way, this Fatima with Women for Afghan Women. I think we have one more question. Well, there's a few different people. Oh, you've got a mic, sorry. Somebody has a mic back there.
Sorry.
What's your name?
My name is Molly Pearl. I just wanted to say thank you to all the panelists for sharing your time and your hearts with us tonight. There are so many aspects of this conversation that we really didn't get to touch on, and it's so imperative that this conversation doesn't end in this room. So my question is for everyone on the panel, what is it absolutely imperative that all of us in here do when we leave this room so that this conversation doesn't stop here and so that we can make positive change moving forward?
I'm going to limit that to 3 people who have very brief answers to that question. Any 3? Maureen, would you like to answer that? Do you have a mic?
Representatives or organizations or our communities reflect, the LGBTQ community or young people. I joined Turning Point's board at the age of 24, thinking that I wasn't going to be smart enough, or I was intimidated by the older women, and I decided to take that role on because I realized that I need to start speaking up for young Muslim Americans here in New York. So we need to make that space for LGBTQ Muslim Americans in some of the bigger organizations and start inviting them to take leadership positions. Because if we're just talking the talk and we're not, is it talking the talk or walking the walk? I'm not sure, but right, we need to start inviting them to the table and letting them lead the discussions. So leadership positions have to be given to them.
As an ally to LGBTQ Muslims, I realized in the past 10 days, the community has just been so bombarded with media requests that you actually got a PR firm. And so I think ally work is kind of important in, yes, putting LGBTQ Muslims in leadership places and in places where their perspectives can be, broadened, can be heard by everyone. But then in our own communities, so I might not have access to a mosque or a church, but I do have access to a Hindu temple. And so when I talk about LGBTQ issues and homophobia, I also talk about Islamophobia and xenophobia, and kind of making that conversation relevant to whatever spaces that are not having these conversations. Like I said, I'm going to go back to my 6th grade classroom. And so if you can do that in your own communities and like I said, also in your own languages, not just in living rooms and kitchens, where it definitely does need to start, but then in more public spaces that still have 4 walls, like schools and places of worship, and just trying to get that together. There's so many resources of, like anti-oppression training workshops and modules and all of that, but then catering them and tailoring them to whatever community or space that you're going into would be a good next step.
I think what everybody said here tonight is the importance of listening to each other, accepting each other as we are, speaking up against the casual the casual lack of acceptance. It's like littering. If everybody picked up trash, we would have none of it on the sidewalk. If everybody picked up each other's trash, said, hey, did you drop something? There would be no trash. Like if we push back wherever we hear homophobic comments or implications, Islamophobic comments or implications, it takes each of us in our families, in our places of worship, in our schools, everywhere we are in our community, speak up. It is time to speak up.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. On behalf of Women for Afghan Women and all the other organizations that came here, thank you, all of you, for showing up tonight. Couldn't put it better than she did right now, so I won't try to say anything. But when she said earlier on, when Kristen said, have our backs, that's the takeaway that I had tonight. Keep these conversations going, and maybe ask questions afterwards outside as we shuffle out of here. And thank you, and good night.
Take care. See you later, Lieutenant.